Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about New York and the Toretsk agglomeration. According to information we have, New York has fallen. This information was confirmed by different mappers, including pro-neutral mappers and pro-Ukrainian mappers. Anyway, summarizing everything, as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to establish complete control over New York and to reach the southwestern outskirts of the village of Nilipovka, and using the second road of attack, the Russians managed to answer the southeastern part of the same village. Currently, according to different Russian sources, there are very heavy clashes exactly in the territory of this village. Most likely, the Ukrainians will not be able to hold their lines for a very long period of time, and sooner or later the Ukrainians will be forced to fall back in the northern direction towards the village of Srebrenivka. And most likely the Russians will start moving after the Ukrainians, trying to secure the territory along the river and along the railways, trying to bypass and trying to encircle Toretsk from the west and the northwest. So the most important part of the battle for the Toretsk agglomeration has begun. Now let's move and talk about Toretsk itself. If you remember, yesterday we were talking about this landfill, the landfill of Pivnichne, and according to a video that was published by the sources, we have colored this territory as an area under complete Russian control. But today, this morning, we got additional clarifications from the soldiers on the ground and from the territory, and according to information we have, the Russians established complete control not over the landfill of Pivnichne, but the Russians captured the terikon of Artyom that is located in the area of the city by the name of Zalizne. And based on this video, based on additional clarifications, we have adjusted the map and colored this landfill and under the color of Russian control, and the previous landfill we have returned to the color of contested area. Anyway, this is also very important progress of the armed force of Russian Federation, and from this landfill the Russians can see everything that happens in the village of Nilipka, in the block of Zabalka, and along the railways. These positions will allow the Russians to move further in the northwestern direction without almost any resistance from the Ukrainian side. The front line of Toretsk collapsed, obviously. Now let's move to the Chasiv Yar direction. During the previous 24 hours, during the previous night, we got additional update that the Russians managed to improve their positions to the southwest of Ivanovsk, and telling the truth, we haven't been receiving anything from this direction for a very long period of time, especially when the Ukrainians began the Kursk offensive. So that's why this report confirms that the Russians resumed their attempts to force the Ukrainians to fall back from this side of the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal. Now let's move to the Pokrovsk direction. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. First, very important, we got the geolocation. More precisely, some Western sources managed to geolocate this video with the Russians who raised the flag in Zalizne. It was very difficult to understand where exactly this event took place, where exactly the Russians raised the flag, and later this building was geolocated. And according to the coordinates, the Russians raised the flag exactly in the most southern part of the village, and based on this video we have adjusted the map and we have colored the village of Novozhelany and Zalizne under complete Russian control. The Russians are moving further. Now let's talk about these positions of armed forces of Ukraine between Kamyshivka and Ptycha. According to different mappers, the Russians managed to secure the area right in front of Kamyshivka, and the Russians managed to establish complete control over the village of Skuchne and Mizhova. The Ukrainians were forced to fall back to the south. And the thing is that the Russians reported that, according to information we have, the Ukrainians are no longer available to hold their lines in Kamyshivka as well, and most likely during the next day, during the upcoming day, the Ukrainians will continue moving further in the southern direction towards the village of Kalinova. So, summarizing everything, we can make a conclusion that Ukrainians most likely are not able to hold anything until the road of M30. So most likely this road M30 is going to be the next defense belt of the armed forces of Ukraine, and this is most likely the area where the Ukrainians will try to slow down the Russians at least a little bit. But I'm not sure whether the Ukrainians are able to do this. Now let's talk about the progress in the western direction, and we see that the Russians either have have some problems, or they stopped to think what to do next. Because for the first time since the beginning of the Pokrovsk offensive, since the movements in the western direction, we haven't received almost anything regarding additional progress towards Novogrodovka and Selidova. And as we discussed in the previous video, the reason of this is significant number of the landfills and the terracons that located around Novogrodovka and around Selidova, which is something like a natural barrier. The Russians stopped, and now they try to think what to do next. According to different mappers, the Russians managed to improve their positions a little bit in Chasiv Yar and capture this village completely, but yet we haven't received even a single geolocation that can confirm this. On the other side, we got some reports from the Ukrainian volunteers who are working in Novogrodovka, Selidova. They reported that they have mentioned and they have discovered and they heard some clashes, rifle fire, mortar strikes inside of the territory of Novogrodovka, saying that the first Russian sabotage and reconnaissance group have already entered the city. For now, we can't confirm this or not to confirm this. We need more details, more geolocations, more updates about this. But anyways, summarizing everything, I believe that the Russians will be forced to stop in this area for a while. They will be forced to stand in these positions during this period when they will think what to do next. The Russians will secure the territory till the road of M30 from this direction, in direction of Kalinova, and maybe after that the Russians will get some plan and they will try to move further in the western direction. For now, as I see, it is very difficult to do. Now let's move further and let's talk about the south Donetsk direction. Different mappers, including neutral mappers, confirmed additional progress of the armed forces of Russian Federation in the vicinity of Vadiane. The Russians managed to improve their positions a little bit further in the western direction. They captured additional 100 meters to the main supply road between the coal mine and the Vadiane itself. So we are talking about this line. Currently, this is the first Russian primary target to cut the supply and support between these two strongholds. If the Russians are able to do this, of course, it will not lead to complete collapse of Ukrainian defense, but it will reduce the Ukrainian logistic possibilities. Now let's move a little bit back and let's go to the Kursk direction. We have additional updates. First, let's talk about the Kupiansk area. According to different mappers, including pro-Ukrainian mappers and pro-neutral mappers, the Russians managed to significantly improve their positions in the vicinity of Pishane, and the Russians are getting closer and closer to the cities and villages along Oskol River. So now the Russians are located right in front of the city of Glushkovka, and the distance between possible Russian edge positions in the village itself is less than 4 kilometers. The Russians are located right in front of Kalishnikovka. In this case, the distance is less than 3.7 kilometers, and the Russians are getting closer and closer to the village of Okruglakovka. As for this direction, the distance is around 5 kilometers. So the Russians are trying to create a very powerful, very strong positions, and then which will allow them to attack the Ukrainian positions using the broad front line attack. As for Kharkiv direction, according to different pro-Russian mappers, the Russians managed to improve their positions and to capture additional territories, additional streets and the buildings in the residential area to the north of Liptsi. The Ukrainians were forced to fall back towards the central part, and now the Russians are getting inside of this area. So most likely the Russians will continue their movements, because the Ukrainians to support the Kursk offensive operation were forced to redeploy some reinforcements in reserve from the Kharkiv area as well. Now let's talk about the Kursk direction. We have additional changes on the ground. During the previous 20 nights, during the previous 12 hours, the Russian sources published the video how they managed to discover the movements of a very big convoy of Ukrainian armed forces who were heading through the village of Agronom towards the village of Pushkarne and Ruskaya Konopelka. As a result of a series of FPV drone strikes, some Ukrainian armored vehicles were damaged, destroyed and stopped, but most of the armored vehicles of armed forces of Ukraine continue moving further. So most likely, according to this video, we can make a conclusion that possibly this territory is already in the gray zone or in the area of contested zone. So we haven't received any geolocation that can confirm this, but the video shown us that the Ukrainians were moving further and they weren't stopped by the Russian counterattack. So now, as I understand, during this day there are going to be very heavy clashes for these two villages, Pushkarnaya and Ruska Konopelka. The Russians will try to do everything they can to restore control over the villages, but let's wait and see what is going to be next. According to pro-Ukrainian mappers, we have some changes on the ground in Glushkovsky direction. In the Glushkovsky direction, according to pro-Ukrainian mappers, the village of Snagast was captured by the Ukrainians. Furthermore, during the previous night, the Ukrainian sources published the video of how they were raising the flag in the village of Opanasovka. I believe that most of you have seen this video, but telling the truth, that was a fake video of 2022 from the Kharkiv direction, when the Ukrainians were conducting their counter-attack and when the Ukrainians were restoring control over the villages between Kharkiv and the border with Russia. So based on this, we can't adjust the map, because most likely that was just a fake, and pro-Ukrainian mappers updated their maps according to the fake news. And that's it for this video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.